Hey listeners, this is Dan Benamor, head of podcasts for Voyage Media. Season 2 of Allegedly is coming up, but between Season 1 and Season 2, we wanted to get you this mega episode. It's longer than our usual episodes, and it's just an incredible story of survival, of a regular person thrown into a remote prison, not knowing if he'd ever get out. This is The American Captain.
This is film and television producer Chris Goldberg. In my job, I often get to meet people whose incredible true stories should be a movie. From private eyes to Mossad spies and undercover agents. But the guy I'm speaking to today, Michael Churchward, aka The American Captain, might have one of the craziest stories I've ever heard. It all started in the 1990s in the Mediterranean. Michael was a captain of a private mega yacht alongside his partner in life, Stephanie, who is chef on board the vessel.
We found ourselves managing and running one of the most glamorous, exclusive mega yachts in the world, which involved a great deal of wealth, pageantry that was unimaginable. She was a little over 200 feet. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful boat with all the toys and bells and whistles that comes with having one of the exclusive mega yachts, and quite frankly, the busiest mega yacht at that time in the world. Our homes were made up of ports of call like Monte Carlo, Cannes, all up and down the south of France, the Greek islands throughout the Mediterranean. And Mr. R, who owned the Picante, was one of a kind. And he was of incredible wealth. He was a billionaire, but you wouldn't have known it. As I got to know him, I immediately clicked with him. He said, "Michael, you're going to work for me, but the crew will work for you. That ship will be yours to command. That will be your responsibility. I'll send it where I want, but you run the ship." And for him to say that was beautiful. That's what I wanted. In the summer months, we were cruising the Greek islands with guests on board. We dropped off our first group of guests in the island of Mykonos. Our itinerary at that time was to make our next landfall on the west coast of Turkey in the port of Kuşadası. A young Turkish port authority boarded the gangway and was held up by my first officer, but he wanted to speak to the captain. And I remember being really annoyed because I was really tired and irritable from an overnight sail, but I marched down the gangway. Stephanie was right there. She sounded alarmed a little bit. And I said, "It's okay. Don't worry about it. I got this. I'm familiar with these people. I know them. They know me." I went up to the ship safe, grabbed a wad of $100 bills, just knowing and familiar with these foreign ports of call that it just might be needed to let us go about our business and on our way. The Turkish port master, who once again I had known and had known me for years coming in and out of these ports, felt very, very uncomfortable detaining me. They weren't sure what was going on. He would not tell me why I was being detained. He whispered to me, "Michael, you are going before a magistrate. You're being arrested, and they're going to hold you." And I said, "For what? What are you talking about? What have we done?" And I will say this right now. Stephanie had learned through the years of sailing around the world with me. Not only was she our chef on board, but she was the gatekeeper for me and really, really protected my well-being. I handed her the money. I gave her some instructions. I said, "This will all clear itself up. Just keep the crew together. Get prepared for the next guest. It'll sort itself out, I'm sure, by tomorrow. And phone Mr. R, our owner. Get a hold of him immediately," which she did.
Now, for legal reasons, we have to tell you, this is an episode of Allegedly. Because of when and where this all occurred, we could not independently verify all the elements of this story. So this is a true story, allegedly. It's Michael's personal account of what happened to him. To protect the innocent and the not so innocent, you will hear us bleep out some real names.
The next morning, I was told that the American consulate was coming down One was a pretty young girl, a Turkish-American girl called who was very concerned, very sweet in her demeanor, but businesslike. I liked her immediately. But then there was her other partner from the American consulate, a man named. And honestly, I don't want to sound nasty, but I could tell immediately, not just from his physical looks, which was just, to be kind, repulsive. He was unkept, he was ungroomed. Quite frankly, he was not an attractive man. But the minute he opened his mouth, I just went, oh no. He immediately had a demeanor and an attitude that automatically thought that I had done something wrong. And he said, you're going to prison. You're going to prison for 40 days. Nothing I can do. We got to catch the bus back to Izmir. I freaking, what the fuck are you talking? I literally got him up against the wall and just trying to hold my temper. He says, we're not going anywhere. What the hell is going on? He says, there's nothing I can do. You're going before a magistrate today. They are going to hold you for 40 days. They came to get me. I was taken in front of inside this gothic, smelly, old building. I stood in the middle of the courtroom, and by this time, the port police had replaced by a whole different group of armed military guards with machine guns and so forth. I was not handcuffed. I was still in my boat uniform. And I looked up at this judge, big black robe, but he had this high collar of red, some kind of apparatus wrapped around the back of his head. And I just was mesmerized at looking this. If it didn't look so sinister, it might have been comical. The only words I could understand were Cirque prison. Cirque's prison. Started slamming the stamp on the desk. American captain, Cirque prison. Boom, boom, boom. Before I knew it, the guards had grabbed me, shackled me, and dragged me out of the courtroom. Stephanie is trying to speak and yell and scream. I was thrown in the back of this tiny little foreign automobile of a minivan with two other Turkish prisoners. And I could see out the back window as we pulled away. I'm looking out the back window, and I caught Stephanie's face, and her green eyes, her crystal green eyes, just welling up with tears. And I just let out a giant moan. I mean, we're talking a bellow that went way deep, came from way down deep inside. We finally arrived at the military prison, Cirque military prison, and I could hear a bunch of screaming and shouting in Turkish, just sitting there huddled outside this office door in this concrete building, sitting on the concrete floor, dingy, dirty, hot, grimy, all the adjectives that you could even imagine. The stale smell just permeated the whole area. And it to the point where it almost made you gag. There was like a single light bulb hanging, just as you could pitch, as dingy as it could be. And sitting at the desk was the commandant. It was hot, steamy, no air conditioning, and the Turkish military guards all had these stained, grimy, sweaty uniforms on. And there were 3 guards standing behind me, big, sinister looking, just as you can imagine, and the commandant sat at the desk. And he started saying something in Turkish, and he looked up, smiled at me, and this wolfish, weird frickin' grin. That instant is when I absolutely knew and felt the danger I was in. All of a sudden, I realized I was in real trouble. And then he screamed and shouted something in Turkish. I assumed they wanted me to take my shirt off. Well, wasn't doing it fast enough, and these 3 guards grabbed me so violently, ripping my shirt off, had me down, ripped my pants off, slammed me against the brick wall, cracked my head, stunned me. And before I knew it, they had my legs spread, and all I could see, all I could see is just the one Turkish guard putting on the plastic glove, and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. And yet, I remember thinking later, I wasn't even hearing myself scream. It was almost a conscious blackout. After a few beatings, hard blows, and of course, the infamous fucking Turkish strip search, which, by the way, believe me, they were experts at it. And I endured it. And the next thing I know, they picked me up. I could barely even stand. And I just remember looking up at the Turkish commandant sitting at his desk and thinking through that smile, I've never experienced that kind of emotion before. No question, if I could have, I would have killed him right there. Anyway, I was taken through the courtroom into the Turkish cell. And all I could do is I just collapsed. I just remember feeling stunned and trying to get a grip on the reality of where I was from just literally not more than 24 hours earlier, being the captain of one of the most luxurious mega yachts in the world, sitting in this dungeon of a hellhole. It was literally a hole in the ground, 16 Turkish prisoners screaming at me in a foreign language. The impact to my psyche was staggering. And right then, I kind of understood this was going to be survival, and literally nothing else but pure survival.
As Michael settled into military prison life, amazingly, he still had no idea what he was being detained for or why he was arrested.
Finally, Stephanie was able to get in and pay a visit, and she was only able to see me through a small barred opening in the wooden door. Being able to see her face, those tear-filled eyes just crushed me, but she was able to convey to me what Mr. R had found out and where this all originated. The arrest warrant was an Interpol warrant originating in Greece some 6 to 7, 8 years earlier. And as soon as she couldn't even get it out of her mouth because she didn't understand, but the minute she said it, I knew what it was. Like, some crew are bad, some owners are bad. Went to work for a Greek owner, real bad guy, and I was warned against him, but I took the job, and he ended up sending us to the Caribbean, but unbeknownst to me, and it was proved out he was a criminal, and he set me up and accused me and the crew of stealing his boat. He had set me up with some insurance scam, and that's where the Interpol warrant originated. And it was always there, never disappeared. And I had sailed all around the world with that in place and never once was detained until now.
But finally realizing why he was in prison didn't make things much easier. It would be a battle to clear his name in a very different system than what Michael was used to in America.
As the days passed inside Sergei prison, the military compound, under absolutely squalor conditions, Stephanie was able to set up shop in Turkey. She was not going to leave me. Got a little place to stay in, a little dungeon, little hotel near the prison. She was taking long taxi rides in the middle of nowhere with the promise of my release for of course, the cost of American US dollars. The danger she faced, everybody was pulling on her here and there, and I couldn't stop worrying endlessly night and day about what she was going through. But she was desperately trying to find us a lawyer that could communicate and navigate the judicial system, which did not exist, and it is not like anything we have in America. There is no such thing as due process.
And once Stephanie did find his lawyer, Michael was not exactly impressed by what he saw.
And I'm not even sure how to begin with this, but she was in her 40s, very plump and bustuous with red lipstick, spiked high heels. When she first came to see me to tell me how much she was going to help me, I just went, oh my God, you have got to be kidding me. But we had paid her $48,000, which, believe me, set her up for life in Turkey. And within 5 minutes, I was shaking my head. I go, no. And just talking to myself, this is a fake. This is not real. She proceeded to tell me how many people she knew, how well she was connected, and that she would have me out in 3 days. 3 days, Michael, you will be out. 3 days, you will be out. And I just go, no way. She could not get me out. I was not released in 3 days. Again, after several weeks, Stephanie was able to get inside again to see me. She was wearing the Muslim gear, of the Muslim women, and that's how she had to blend in. When I saw her face, my heart sunk. She was gaunt. She was real thin. And the 40th day had arrived. They could only hold me 40 days. Everybody was looking forward to it. And after that 40th day came and went, I was not released. I was devastated. Looking at her face, crying, I couldn't help but just whisper harshly to her, but lovingly as best I could, communicating to her, Stephanie, get home. It was soon after that, Stephanie finally left for the United States. Then the word came that through the grapevine, the prison grapevine, that I was being transferred to Buja prison, Izmir, Turkey. And I knew nothing. I hadn't known anything about it, but the other inmates, and particularly one, was frightened for me. He made it very known, shaking his head, that no. He was so worried about me being transferred to Buja prison. They wanted to get rid of me and get me out of there, and they thought they could hide me by sending me to the most infamous prison practically on the planet. I learned later it was number 3 on the human rights hit list for human rights violations. Izmir, Turkey was a maximum security lockdown down through this dark, filthy maze of tunnels, literally underground, going through large, heavy steel lock gates. I think I counted 8 or 9 steel gates that we passed through, and it got darker and dingier and wetter. Prisoners I could hear starting to scream and chant as I was being shoved and prodded with the black batons, the big, thick Turkish black batons. And I'm just screaming inside my head. I go, no! I mean, I knew immediately with every fiber of my body, this was a bad place. And by this time I was a little bit hardened, but I didn't quite understand where I was going and what I was doing until we got to the last cell gate, big heavy cell gate, and they opened it up. And standing right there, right at that last cell gate, was this tall, handsome, I later learned, Iranian prisoner with this flowing gown on, including slippers, who spoke the most perfect words of like Oxford English. Welcome, Captain, welcome. I was stunned. I couldn't even speak. He says, come with me. We have a place for you. And all around him, scampering all around him, were these prisoners, other prisoners in rags and just like these scallywags. And he escorted me, and he had 2 concubines that he looked after, 2 young boys that waited on him hand and foot. He would invite me in for tea. He was an art thief in Beverly Hills, incredibly wealthy. He was one of the premier opium smugglers out of the hills of Afghanistan. He had connections, huge connections from the outside, which took care of the guards' families, enabling them to smuggle everything he needed to exist comfortably in there. And he shared it with me. He shared his wit, his knowledge, and he knew everything going on in the prison system, including all about me. He would tell me things that were happening in the newspapers and the media about me that I was unable to hear about because I had no contact.
One of the things this colorful and memorable prisoner told Michael was that his old friends at the American consulate were on their way to the prison to see him.
And I quickly asked, can I get a piece of paper from you? And I wrote a handwritten note to the consulate that I was going to try to smuggle out, just to get back to Stephanie, to tell them somehow, some way, what was happening to me and what I was experiencing. And I did just that. I was able to sit down next to her, across from her. And of course, a Turkish prison guard sat right at the entrance to the door. And I was able to have a one-on-one with the look of concern on her face when she saw me hit me with like a ton of bricks. I didn't realize what I had transformed into and what I was looking like. I'm sure I looked like some kind of beaten animal to her. But she quickly wanted to try to have some kind of conversation about niceties. Are you okay? Do you get enough tea? I go, stop. I told her, stop. I don't give a fuck about the niceties. What are you doing? What are they doing to get me out of here? I am going to die in here. And I said to her with a whisper, I said, I'm going to slip it. I've got a letter. You got to get it to Stephanie. And Mr. R, please just take the letter. And she agreed to. So under the table, I tried to slip to her this letter, and she grabbed it and she got it. And in that minute, thinking that the guard was half asleep, he wasn't. He saw it, and boom, he screamed at her, screamed at me in Turkish. The other guards came in and quickly escorted me out. And that was the end of that meeting. And then, of course, that led to solitary confinement.
That's right, solitary confinement, as if things couldn't get any worse for Michael.
And literally my darkest hour. I definitely thought, is this really how I die? A depression hit me that was so heavy it ached. As I sat in solitary, deep despair, was able to get in to see me briefly through a crack in one of the cell blocks, and he told me, literally whispered to me, Captain, you're going to be leaving here soon. And I tried to crawl over and hear him, and I go, what? And you are leaving here soon, which just stunned me. Within 24 hours, the extradition had started. Turkey did not want to take any more pressure from the international community by holding me there at Buja prison. They wanted me out. So that extradition process started. Once again, paraded back up through the dungeon, and the screams and the American captain and this. And at that point, I had survived it. I knew I was moving forward, although I was terrified. But I felt a sense of a bit of respect by the Turkish guards, the inmates, that I had survived that place. And I was moving forward and being extradited to Greece. And through the hard work of Stephanie and many others, Mr. R, the State Department, so many people, I was able, as a foreigner, to get a trial date incredibly quick in the Greek system. And when I tell you, a courtroom in Greece is like nothing most Americans could possibly understand. There were several trials going on at once. The screaming and the shouting and the chaos. We were being interrupted by other lawyers from other trials and so forth. But I stood firm in front of a 3-judge tribunal. I finally got to a court to where all the hard work by everyone could show these judges, this tribunal, that I was innocent. I had all the documentation, everything to prove that I did not do this. And I thought I would be released that night. And that was my mindset going in. And it started off well. They were speaking Greek, stamping papers as they do, lawyers screaming at each other back and forth. And then my interpreter, standing right next to me, was whispering in my ear on the first count of major theft, innocent, acquitted. And I'm going, and I'm looking around back at Mark and Stephanie. I'm smiling. My lawyer is smiling. I'm going, okay, second count of major whatever it was, the charges they've made up, acquitted. I was found innocent. Then it came to the last charge of, which was a misdemeanor of mischief. Misdemeanor mischief. Guilty. I looked at her and I go, okay, all right, I'll pay a fine. Just get me out of here, get me out. And she just looked at me with her face just dropped. 3 years. 3 years in prison for a fucking misdemeanor. I screamed at amongst all this chaos. Off the high ceilings, my scream of no just bellowed and echoed, and I literally became delirious in my anger. I could feel Mark and Stephanie trying to reach me and grab me as the guards just, once again, grabbed me, shackled me, escorted me to a small area waiting room. And then towards the end of the day, I finally was able to speak to my lawyer, who initially tried to be optimistic. Michael, you won. You won your case. You're going to be out. You'll be out with time served. You'll be out in 10 months, less than a year. I looked at him with a look that said it all, and I just whispered venomously to him, you fucking find a way to get me out. I don't care what it takes, what it costs. Find another way to get me out. And I told him I will not survive here. I will die in this prison. You gotta get me out. And he looked at me with a little bit of a frightened look, and he said, Michael, we may have one more chance. I'll come to see you in a while. I'm not sure when, but I will come to see you. I was taken back to my cell, obviously crashed and burned. I just hung in my cell, didn't leave it for a few days. But I finally mustered up enough energy to fight the all dangerous, chaotic, deathly dangerous phone lines. There were 5 payphones on the wall with all these outlaws of inmates behind you, getting in line and screaming and shouting. And finally, I got to one of the payphones, calling long distance, collect. And I reached Stephanie, her voice on the other end. And I heard her slight whisper, go, Michael, are you okay? I could tell something was different in her voice. Something, even the words she used were different. And I said, Stephanie, are you okay? Are you okay? And I'm cupping the receiver, trying to talk with her 10,000 miles away. And she said it, and it hit me like nothing else had hit me. I said, Michael, I am having an affair. And from that point, I went numb. I couldn't hear anything else. I just dropped the receiver, made my way back through the freaking outlaw gangs of inmates behind me, and crashed and burned again in my cell. And then a couple of days later, one of the old boys, an old boy doing life in prison for killing his business partner, and I always enjoyed his company, always had little bits of prison wisdom, decided he was going to pay me a visit. He came into my cell and told me, said, Michael, it's prison, unwritten prison knowledge that a girlfriend's only last a year. Maybe wives might last a year and a half, but they all will leave. It's your circumstance that you have to be worried about. And I just looked up, shaking my head. Here I was. I caught myself. I had to smile briefly because he was a likable old boy, but I just caught myself listening to what he was telling me. Here I was, taking wisdom from some old inmate doing life for murder, and I just shook my head. I go, oh my God. But it hit home. And I tried to regroup. Okay, after about 3 weeks, I finally get word through that my lawyer was going to come to see me. And he had a big smile, and there was a part of me that liked him. He had his sharp suit on, but he was a little bit crooked. That's why I needed him. He proceeded to tell me, Michael, we're going to appeal, and it's a gamble. If we appeal, there's the gamble that they could give you more time, but that's our only last chance of getting you out of here. Now, no foreigners ever released on appeal. Never, ever, ever. But maybe we might have a shot. We might have a shot to get you out of prison, but you will have to wait and be monitored for about a year and a half until your appeal court date. And I looked at my lawyer and I said, do it, whatever it takes. And as we were just separating, I looked back and I go, how much is it going to cost? And he said, $7,000, $7,000. And I just said, okay, I'll get Stephanie to give you the money. She will send you the money. We need to make this happen. Well, then I knew I had to get a hold of Stephanie. I hadn't talked to her since the day she had told me that she was having an affair, which just crushed and hurt me. But I needed to get a hold of her. Once again, the waiting line for the 5 payphones on the cement wall that were backed up by 100 inmates, all screaming at the top of their lungs, to get to each payphone, all monitored and guarded and regulated by the Albanian gangs. And it was treacherous, it was frickin' dangerous to wait in line, but I had to do it. And you only got 2 minutes once you connected, and they were strict about it. I finally reached that 10,000 miles across the ocean. I hear the soft voice of Stephanie, and she gets on the line, and I'm cupping the receiver. The gang of outlaws are just crazy noise behind me, screaming and shouting. I'm huddled down, and I told Stephanie, I'm gonna get out there. They're going to appeal that. You need to send $7,000 to our lawyer. He's going to bribe the judge. They are going to let me out. They will release me on appeal. There was dead silence on the other end. I go, Stephanie, can you hear me? Michael, we can't pay any more money. This is a con. They're gonna con you again. I go, Stephanie, they're going to get me out. I will be able to get out of this prison. And my time was getting up. I could feel the screaming and shouting behind me, all in a foreign language. I just huddled down, had the receiver right here, right at my mouth. And I just remember with a frickin' strong, venomous hiss, I just said, Stephanie, you fucking send that $7,000 and you send it today. And I could hear the noise behind me, and just then, boom, the manga, who is the enforcer for the Albanian gangs, this big monster, the most feared guy in the prison, he was the enforcer for the phones hired by the Albanian gangs. He had hit the payphone, my payphone in front of me, had hit it from the side, and it literally exploded off the wall. Exploded. Nothing mattered in that moment, and I just remember clutching it. I didn't want to let go of the phone until I heard Stephanie say, okay. I went to that place where I was absolutely not afraid to be hurt, and I frickin' screamed at the top of my lungs, an inch away from his face, holding this fucking phone receiver, telling him in English, which he didn't understand a word, that I would stick it up his ass so far he'd be speaking to it on the other end. He took a step back, and he looked at me and looked around. I don't know, I think later I realized he might have saw that I went completely insane, and I didn't care. And he made his way back through the crowd and walked away. A couple of days later, after the manga incident, the came to my cell. And I could tell he wanted to scold me, but he actually had some really incredible news. Through the grapevine, as he always found out, my lawyer had got word to him to get to me that he had received the $7,000 and that my court date had been set for 2 more weeks. I just was elated, although I knew he was trying to temper it, and he says it usually doesn't work. It almost never worked with a foreigner. So the day arrived, I ended up being escorted out up to another court in front of another judge. And this time it was a single judge. And there were a lot of men, maybe 30 guys, inmates, all sitting there, all mostly Greek, all sitting there, and each one being called. All I heard all day long was that took about an hour and a half. Hoki, Greek for no. I heard my name called, and my lawyer stands up, and he's looking at me, and he wasn't all that happy, but I was as nervous as could be. And the next thing I know, the judge, a big giant stamp on the desk, nay, and said a bunch of other words. And I looked at my lawyer, and he's like got this giant grin on him. He goes, yes, you're out. They agreed to let you out on appeal. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe when the judge actually granted me release. But the conditions of this release were serious. My passport would not be given back to me. I would have no passport. I was instructed, more like ordered, not to leave the country at all. And I was to check into the police station every week to be monitored and checked on to make sure I did not leave that country. But I was finally getting out of the prison. And I knew once I was out, I could possibly implement my plan. But they were strict orders. If I made any effort at all to leave the country, I would be arrested and thrown back into prison. But none of that mattered to me. None of it mattered to me. I knew I had to get myself home. I knew I couldn't spend one more day in prison. I would either die or be killed. There is no question about it. I had to get myself home. I didn't tell my lawyer, nobody, nothing, what I had planned to do. I immediately went to the American Embassy, which was downtown Athens. Saluted the Marine Guards, they let me in, and I will tell you, when I walked into the American Embassy and escorted into the department, every single person, one, they knew of me, of course. I had been in the news and had been talked about for a year. I was just so grateful how they treated me. They treated me like a celebrity. They asked me if I was okay. They had followed my odyssey for this whole year, and just fantastic feeling. I was a little fuzzy because of all the English being spoken, so I had to kind of concentrate and focus. I really wanted to get to the person who could maybe issue me a passport, which I did, and I did request that. Now, for the American Embassy to issue me a passport was highly illegal. But I was brought in to see, at that time, the ambassador, who was now high up in the State Department. I've seen him on TV. He was wonderful. He issued some orders. In 3 hours, I had a passport, an American passport, brand new. Albeit it came with a small little piece of paper in the front instructing in Greek and in English that I was not to leave the country. I walked out the embassy doors. I was like, my step was, out of the hot, skipping and jump. I saluted the Marine Corps guards right at the gate and said, thank you very much, and proceeded to rip that little piece of paper out of my passport. So I had already a plan in mind. I made my way to the downtown Athens bus station. There's a port on the very western side of the Peloponnese where all the ferries going to Ancona or Italy leave out of. I needed to take an overnight bus trip, possibly, hopefully get on the ferry and get myself out of the country. I was terrified. I had that anxiety that just consumed every fiber of my body. Beyond the nervousness, I was exhausted. I couldn't chance going through the passport check because if I was caught, if there was any kind of alert against me leaving the country, I would certainly be back to prison and be serving a lot, many, many, many more years. And I spotted them. I spotted two guys having Amstel beer, big Amstel beers, 9 o'clock in the morning, drinking away, and I decided to approach them. And as it turned out, they were 2 English truck drivers.
To be clear, Michael's talking about 2 complete strangers, men that he'd never met. He was about to risk his entire escape by asking them for the biggest favor possible.
I decided right then, once they were engaging, they were friendly, I introduced myself as an American, and I decided just briefly, flat out, tell them what happened to me. Truthfully, that I spent the last year in a Turkish and Greek prison. I gotta get out of the country. They were incredibly empathetic, and one of the truck drivers said, well, they never checked the back of the cab of the truck. They never ever looked there. Why don't you just get in the back of the cab? We'll load the truck. You just stay on the inside the truck until we get to the other side. And I looked at the 2 of them and I go, are you sure? And they both looked at me directly, but I could tell they were mesmerized by my story. And they said, damn right, Yank, we'll get you home. We'll get you home. And they hid me in the back of the truck, got onto the ferry, and that's how I made my way across into Italy. I had gotten out of Greece. I couldn't believe the feeling I had. It was a crystal blue, hot day. And I took a deep breath and I almost buckled my knees. And I just, the English guys spotted me and they came over and welcome, Captain, welcome. And by that time, I think they even realized that they were part of a greater adventure. And I made the decision then to call the American embassy in Rome. And I got onto a guy who I told him who I was and what had happened to me and what I was doing. And I was very leery. I'm very nervous to tell anybody anything. But what I wanted to cover myself if I was stopped by Interpol or security checks at Rome airport. I needed to have the American embassy right there to possibly be able to take custody of me. That was my hope in case something went south. He agreed to meet me at the airport with the automatic weapons everywhere, the chaos going on, and I just took a deep breath and I told him, just keep an eye on me. And he said, I will. Good luck. You'll be fine. And I made my way through the security lines back and forth, got to the window, looked at my passport, didn't really look at it last night, but my heart was like beating out my chest. And he stamped it, exit, and I was through. Next thing I know, I was on a plane flying to New York. I finally arrived in New York City. I got off the plane and, most people might have thought that I just dropped to my knees, kissed the ground, but it wasn't that for me. There was a sense of being overwhelmed, quite frankly, and completely out of focus. But I managed to get to the phone immediately. First thing I did was get to a payphone and find the connecting flight to Fort Lauderdale. But I've managed to call Stephanie and tell her, Stephanie, tonight, I will be in Fort Lauderdale tonight. She was there at the airport to meet me. We both sobbed uncontrollably, but I had made it home. And I told her, I don't care about anything else. I'm home. You got me home. As the days evolved, I didn't understand what had happened to me. I knew something was wrong because I couldn't focus. I couldn't even go into a grocery store. And then the media were on top of me, calling for interviews, even camped out in my front yard again, that type of thing. Through Stephanie, starting to learn and realize the entire community and how huge the effort was in our town of Fort Lauderdale that also spread nationally and internationally to famous people like Dustin Hoffman, Ross Perot, and of course, Mr. R. Their efforts to get me home I felt so intimidated because there was no way I could begin to thank all these people. After being confused, out of focus for a few weeks, there was really only one person I felt I needed to go see, and that was Mr. R. And he'd called me, and I'd spoken to him, and he invited me up to his office in Palm Beach Gardens, big, huge building that he owns. He said one thing, and this is the epitome of who Mr. R was. He said, "Michael, the world out there is a jungle, and you're one of the lions." I knew immediately he understood what I was going through. He knew what I needed again. He knew I needed to go back to sea. He knew I needed to be who I was. And I walked out of his office feeling more alive. I just felt like I could move forward. And that's exactly how he set things up. A few weeks later, he called and asked me if I'd be willing to go down to Australia and take a look at another boat that he's interested in buying. And I swear to this day, I still think he bought that vessel for me. He knew I needed to be who I was.
Now, back at the helm of a mega yacht, Michael finally had a moment to reflect on what he'd been through.
And then we were getting ready to make our last long trip from Nuka Hiva to the Galapagos, which is a long stretch of open ocean up to the equator. And I was up on watch, and I'm doing my captain thing, and I'm out on the wings looking through the binoculars, and I see like this gurgle of ocean way off. It was building and building like a tsunami of water. And I'm going, what? Oh my God. Go down below. Get everybody, all the crew on deck. Get them on deck. You've got to witness this. I am talking thousands and thousands and thousands of dolphins swimming and diving and jumping straight at us. They heard the hum of our engines from miles and miles away and came running to greet us. And it lasted probably 3 hours. The crew was exhausted. I just shook my head. Are you kidding me? That was a majestic moment. And I literally thought to myself, right at that moment, 18 months earlier, I was in the depths of these foreign, despicable prisons. And here I was in this beautiful paradise. Here I was back where I belong as captain of one of the great mega yachts.
Allegedly is a production of Voyage Media. The series is produced by Nat Mundel, Robert Mitas, and Dan Benamor. This episode, American Captain, was produced by Chris Goldberg, executive produced by Michael Churchward. Michael wrote a book about his experiences, God Waits Outside. It's available on Amazon. A link is in the show notes. Edited by John Higgins. Original music by Derlis Gonzalez. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you're listening, and subscribe now for future episodes.